welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 194. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike, and here we are. It's almost Christmas. It's almost the end of the year. I can't believe it. Feels like it flew by.
Time flies. This will be our last regular episode of the year. More on that in a moment. We had a little bad news in the music world this week. We lost a pretty important figure in world music, really. Someone who crossed over a lot of different genres.
Yeah, including jazz. And classical, probably a little bit, too.
Yeah, that was Zakir Hussain, the Indian tabla player, composer, percussionist, music producer, and I guess film actor as well.
Yeah.
He passed away on the 15th of December. He was born in 1951. He was regarded as one of the greatest tabla players of all time. And he was known for bringing classical Indian music to a wider audience and also receiving 4 Grammy Awards. We most recently thought of him again because of Charles Lloyd's Sacred Thread recording from his Trio series.
Yeah, which I have. We didn't talk about it on the podcast, but I've certainly listened to it many times. I really like it. It's very calming. I'd recommend it to listeners who are feeling a little on edge, let's say.
Yeah, and in the jazz world, some other notables he played with over the years are John Handy, John McLaughlin, Pharoah Sanders, Pat Martino, and Dave Holland, just to name a few.
Yeah, some real giants there.
So rest in peace, Zakir Hussain.
Right.
As I mentioned, this is our last regular episode of the year. When we complete this episode, Mike, we'll have published 49 regular episodes this year.
Okay, that's pretty impressive.
And that includes 289 recordings in classical and jazz.
So we heard more than 289 recordings this year because we certainly hear a lot more than the ones we talk about.
Yeah, that's just the ones that we featured on the podcast. So it's always good to have a look back. And next week, we'll have our best of 2024 episode coming out. So among those 289 recordings, we'll have a little review. And we're going to pick out our favorite 20 classical albums and favorite 20 jazz recordings. And how we usually do that, we do it in the bizarro world kind of way.
We do. It's sort of our, I guess you could say bizarro world, but it's sort of, what was that English holiday where the servants like change places with or maybe it was ancient Rome where that happened. I don't remember. But the servants change places with their employers.
Right. So I'm going to pick my favorite 10 classical albums and send those to Mike, and he's going to pick his favorite 10 jazz ones, and then we'll both round out the list with 10 others for each category, and we'll come up with a program and just review. In case you missed any episodes, tune in next week, and you'll get a little review of what we talked about this year. And just a heads up for regular listeners, after that, we'll take the first week off in January because we need a little bit of a break. And that's when things slow down here in Japan around the New Year's. And we'll come back with our first regular episode of 2025 on January 13th.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. If I do the jazz and you do the classical, like our top 10, we'll both inevitably pick albums that the other wouldn't have picked in their original ones. And that's kind of what I want. I want some of I want some surprises in there.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think we're a little bit too expert in our individual fields. It's good to give that away. And another great thing about our podcast is you get to hear this end of year list for free. Unlike at Gramophone Magazine, this is something that's been annoying me this week. Gramophone does a recordings of the year digital booklet every year, and it's been free, for 10 years. And now this year, they've decided to put it behind a paywall. Who does that? End of year lists are always free online. You're basically advertising the albums that you like the best, and you're kind of helping them, sell more. And I think that's a service to the labels and the artists who record them. But no, Gramophone has put it behind a paywall. I'm not pleased, let's say.
Imagine that, charging people to tell them what were the best albums, in your opinion.
Well, think about it this way. If the best albums is basically an ad for these albums. Right. It's a glorified ad. So basically what they want you to do is to take out a subscription so that you can see an ad. That's the way I think about it. It's unjust.
Anyway, before we get to our best of episode, we've still got 6 new recordings to get through in this show. We've got a lot of variety here. And as always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all the music we'll discuss. At the top of the description, there's also a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can check out the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. And if you can't see the full description or the recording list or links are not easy to follow on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, you can always come over to our host site, Podbean, podbean.com. Everything is easy to follow there for this and all previous episodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend to help us grow our audience. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a review wherever you listen to us, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, another way we can get new listeners. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases as they pop up. You can leave a comment there as well if you'd like. You can check us out on X now too. I'm putting up the episodes there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We will play musical samples in our discussion as usual in this episode, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. We also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists.
And we're off. Let's start talking about the music for this week. The first album we have, this is our sort of Baroque album of the week. I like to start with some earlier music from either the Renaissance or the Baroque era. And this we have a Baroque and a little bit of classical era on here. This is the Frans Brüggen project. People may remember Frans Brüggen. He was a great recorder player. I remember him from my youth. He was one of the early practitioners of the period instruments. And this is an album by Lucie Horsch, recorder player, and we heard her on the podcast before. That was over a year ago now. It's almost 2 years, actually, because that album came out in January. Her previous album, Origins. This one is the Frans Brüggen project. She's accompanied by the Orchestra of the 18th century and some rather famous names in Baroque music, too, who I'll mention when they come up. All right, this album was released by Decca, and it came out on November 8th, so we're a little behind the times here talking about this now. But I had it on my list, and I just couldn't get it in, so now we're doing it. There are other reasons I had to wait for this, and I'll explain that in just a moment. First, let me unpack this album, because it does need some unpacking. It's rather special. Let me go into the Decca booklet. Now, I want to say something about this. I actually bought this CD, so I have access to the booklet, but the booklet is not available online at Idagio or at eClassical or even at the Decca website. And it should be, because it's sort of important to have this information to really enjoy this album. You can listen to it casually and still enjoy it, but you can get deeper into it if you know what it's about. So let me read from the booklet note for you here. I've sort of paraphrased this a little bit. It's not exact, but in 18th century Europe, there were hundreds of artisans earning a living by making and selling wind instruments. Their merchandise gradually became redundant, replaced by, and they put this in quotes, improved instruments that were usually easier to play and cheaper to produce. Well, that's a good and bad thing. You kind of lose the individuality of the instruments, but more people play them and they're more widely distributed. Many of those older instruments that survived are now housed in museums, glass case exhibits off limits to today's players, while others have entered the obscurity of private collections. Now, I remember, I forget who the cellist was, but he was talking about old cellos, and he said that the instruments themselves would be very sad not to be being played. They were made to be played, and now they're sitting behind a glass case. A musical instrument does not enjoy that life. It wants to sound. And in fact, that's the case on this album too, but I'll get to that in just a moment. The Dutch recorder, player, and conductor Frans Brüggen, a true pioneer of the early music revival, amassed a remarkable collection of historic recorders for the equally remarkable purpose of playing them. Because they were handmade by different makers, they all have strikingly individual sound qualities, and that's what's really special about this album. Lucie Horsch formed the idea of recording an album on instruments from Brüggen's collection after she was invited to play them for a brief private encounter. This album developed as her way of celebrating his legacy. Access to the recorders on this album, granted by Brüggen's widow, the art historian Machteld Brüggen Israelis, was carefully managed due to their age. Strict limits were set for the amount of time that Horsch could play on them. By the way, I hope I'm saying her name right. I'm doing it like it looks in English. She's Dutch, and this could be a completely different pronunciation, so forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. Horsch herself suggests that the end result could almost be regarded as a live recording, and I would agree with that after hearing the album. With the most fragile recorders, she says, we were only able to do 2 full takes of a piece. She continues, I realized in the short periods I was given to prepare the instruments that playing them restores some of their powers. As the breath and its humidity were gently reintroduced to them, you noticed how they began to blossom. That made me confident that this project was meant to be. And I'm going to interject here. Indeed, instruments want to be played no matter how old they are. Being behind a glass case is kind of like embalming a human body and just putting it on display, like they did to, Lenin in Russia, and things like that. That's kind of what I feel about when I see instruments in cases like that. None of the instruments on this recording conforms to the modern convention of performing Baroque music at A equals 415 hertz. As a result, there was a lot of harpsichord retuning done for this album. Brüggen's suite of instruments offers a priceless snapshot of recorder sound from the 1680s to the 1740s. The different instruments, with their variations in sound, tuning, and intonation, influenced Horsch's repertoire choices, and also provided her with insights into past performance techniques, many of which came as a surprise. The instruments all required a much more delicate approach and careful articulation than Horsch normally uses on modern recorders. She says that variety was the guiding principle for the makers of these recorders, not predictability. The instruments are all detailed in the album booklet. There are photographs of them and indications of which is used on which track and why it was chosen. I'll try to give the details about them just a little bit when I talk about the individual tracks. And as I mentioned, the sad thing is that Decca's excellent booklet seems not to be available for download online. As I said, the album can be easily enjoyed as a casual listen, but the booklet note and its detail on the instruments adds some intellectual understanding to what we're hearing. And if you don't know this, you're missing a dimension of the program. So you're still getting the music, which is great, but there's another dimension that's just not there for you without the booklet. So I'd like to encourage Decca to at least have the booklet available for perusal on their website. If you don't want us to download it, you can at least have it so that we can open it on the website. That's what I would suggest. And of course, I can't write to Decca Records because they're this worldwide company with no actual website. There's just no way to get in touch with them. I guess I could write to somebody in some office and they'll just kind of palm me off on someone else. I'm not doing that. Another tribute to Brüggen is having the Orchestra of the 18th Century, the period instrument ensemble Brüggen co-founded in 1981 on the album, as well as Brüggen's nephew, the cellist Albert Brüggen, on the chamber works. And we're going to hear him right away, along with Lucie Horsch and a favorite of ours, Rachel Podger on the violin, and Tom Foster on harpsichord in the first piece, Joseph Haydn's Piano Trio in G major, Hoboken 1525, the Gypsy Rondo. And this is the Gypsy Rondo movement, the third movement only, Rondo al Ungherese. This was arranged by Farrington, I don't have his first name, for recorder, violoncello, and harpsichord. So it's originally a piano trio, and we're obviously not hearing that here. Now, Horsch is playing a soprano/descant recorder in C by Robert Wine. Nijmegen, made circa 1730 to 1750. Let's just get the sound of that right away. I just want to sample the first track. Here we go. What a delightful opening to this album.
Yeah.
Delightful is a word you really can't use in jazz or popular music, is it?
Not too much.
It's just one of those things that classical music can do. It starts with some athletic playing, as you heard from the recorder, and we're thrown right into the sound world of the instrument. The instrument itself has a warmth to it, and the high notes don't pierce, at least not in Lucie Horsch's hands. At the minute and 22 mark, the rhythm suddenly changes to the heavy, chugging Ungherese of the title. It's played with a committed character by the orchestra, and just because it's called Ungherese, I think we should sample that too, so let's hear that part. And so the violin comes in a bit in that arrangement and takes over for a bit. And we heard that heavy kind of Ungherese, the Hungarian rhythm there. Really great piece. Track 2, Arcangelo Corelli, Concerto Grosso number 8 in G minor, Opus 6 number 8, the Christmas Concerto. And we're hearing the fifth movement of this, the Allegro. Now, the Christmas part of it doesn't come until the last movement, and this is not it. This really doesn't have a Christmas theme to it. So this is played on a descant recorder in C by Richard Haka, Amsterdam, circa 1680 to 1690. This recorder has a more piercing sound to it. Horsch keeps it light sounding, and her athleticism comes through in this quick movement. This is not the movement with the Christmas Pastoral, as I mentioned. There's some nice fluttering figuration from Horsch toward the end. Track 3, Alessandro Marcello, Oboe Concerto in D minor, SZ 799. This is the second slow movement, Adagio. This is on an alto treble recorder in F by Jan Steenbergen from Amsterdam, circa 1720. This is a slow movement beginning with a pulsing, repeating note from the orchestra as the recorder comes in melodically. Let's hear a little bit of this just for a little change of pace. And of course, there we are hearing the orchestra of the 18th century. The instrument on this track is warm, like it was in the first track. Horsch handles the melody with great beauty of phrasing. At the 2-minute mark, there's a sudden downturn to the lower frequencies of the recorder, which comes as a surprise. It sounds spontaneous, perhaps the result of only being able to do 1 or 2 takes. And I think that really adds to it. We discover this odd change along with the soloist here. Tracks 4 through 6, Johann Sebastian Bach, Keyboard Concerto number 2 in E major, BWV 1053, arranged by Frans, Brüggen, and Lucie Horsch, though not together, for recorder and orchestra. From a keyboard concerto. This is played on something called a fourth flute in B flat, which is tuned at 392 Hertz by Frederick Morgan, circa 1978, so it's kind of a newer model, I guess. Track 4 is the first movement. It doesn't have a tempo, but it's sort of allegro. At Bullien's opening from the orchestra, the recorder comes in chirping at the 22nd mark. What's interesting here is that one can sense the keyboard-like figures that the recorder is playing. There's a kind of angularity to the theme, a non-curviness that would suit the keyboard over the recorder, really. It's an interesting choice of transcription for Brüggen and Horsch to tackle here. Track 5 is the second movement, Siciliano. We get the whole work in this case. The Siciliano rhythm has a slow pulse and is well articulated by the orchestra, which plays it with a bit of a legato feel. The recorder comes in with a melodic figure in the rhythm. There's a sudden, surprising leap into another key by the recorder, again sounding completely spontaneous, right at the beginning of the first minute. The movement continues smoothly, with occasional sudden moves into new keys. There's an aliveness to these performances that I'm really enjoying, and again, that could be because you only had 1 or 2 takes to do them. Track 6 is the third and final movement, Allegro. The recorder comes in after the orchestral intro with a pretty complex line. It really does sound like a keyboard line. It sounds like it was a challenge to transcribe from the keyboard. So keyboard-like is the theme, and this is the section that I'm going to sample. So let's hear a bit of this rather odd-sounding theme on the recorder. Yeah, the way that theme just jumps all over the range of the recorder. Yeah. There would be like hand leaps on the keyboard, but it's pretty remarkable to hear Horsch do that here. Her ability to make this musical on the recorder is very impressive. This and the first movement sound like quite a challenge, not least because of their 6+ minute lengths, complete with middle sections. In this one, the recorder has chromatic moves upward from around the 2-minute and 20-second mark, and I'm wondering how the instrument is equipped to do this, or whether it's Horsch manipulating the tone via her breath. It could have something to do with the fact that it's a 1978 instrument, so it's made to play chromatic melodies or chromatic themes. Moments like this are far more expressive on an instrument like this than they are on the keyboard due to the resources required to perform them. It really sounds like Horsch is making a great effort in this piece, and that really draws us in further. Track 7. Johann Sebastian Bach, Orchestral Suite No. 3 in D major, BWV 1068. Movement 2, the famous Air. This features Lucie Horsch on recorder, Rachel Padra on violin, Esther van der Eyck on viola, Albert Brüggen on cello, and Tom Foster on harpsichord. Horsch plays an alto treble recorder in F by Peter Bressan, London, circa 1700 to 1725. The recorder comes in right away in this famous movement. The tone is right up front and stands out, as this is usually played by strings, so the string melody sort of blends in with the rest of the orchestra. But not here. The recorder is really draws the ear like it's in high relief to the rest of the playing. The instrument has a striking timbre in this context, and I think a striking timbre in general. So let's sample it. Track 8, Johann Sebastian Bach, Partita No. 3 for solo violin in E major, BWV 1006. This is the 6th movement Gigue, arranged by Franz Brüggen and Lucie Horsch for recorder. Horsch plays a tenor recorder in C by Johann Christoph Denner, made in Nuremberg in 1680 to 1700, around that time. So this is for a solo recorder here. It's originally for solo violin, for the famous Sonatas and Partitas for solo violin by Johann Sebastian Bach. This instrument has a lower, full, breathy tone, and this work translates nicely to the instrument. Let's hear a bit of it. Yeah, and that Gigue bounce is kind of light in this piece, but this takes some serious virtuosity to play on a recorder. And this is very impressive playing. And a great tone as well. Horsch gives the material an appealing bounce and cushioned attack that are both very appealing. Tracks 9 and 10, Georg Philipp Telemann, Trio Sonata in A minor, TWV 42, lowercase e4. Oh, I hope you got that memorized. Lucie Horsch on recorder, Rachel Podger on violin, Albert Brüggen on cello, Tom Foster on harpsichord, and the instrument is different in the two movements. This is, I think, a 4-movement work, but we only hear movements 1 and 4 here. So track 9 is movement 1, a largo, for an alto treble recorder in F by Thomas Tansby, Sr., made in London, circa 1700 to 1725. The piece sounds a bit lamenting, but the timbre of the recorder disguises that, and I wonder if sadness can be communicated on a recorder. I think a kind of, light sadness could be, but it's not really a sad-sounding instrument, This is an interesting track to listen to because I think some of the emotion might be lost here. But track 10, the 4th movement of the work, Allegro, is for alto treble recorder in F by Peter Bresson, London, circa 1700 to 1725. This movement is the opposite in character to the previous. We've skipped over 2 movements in this piece, but it works well this way, like an early slow-fast work. The recorder gets some athletic figuration within the melody. There are many appealing, breathy accents on the theme. Tracks 11 and 12, Georg Philipp Telemann again, Fantasia number 3 for solo flute in B minor, TWV 40:4. The alto treble recorder in F is by Jan Steenbergen, Amsterdam, circa 1720. On track 11, we hear the first movement, Largo Vivace, and then Largo Vivace again. This is for solo flute, and with the recorder's timbre, the opening is haunting. The Vivace comes within the last 30 seconds, and this is naughtier. Again, I like the cushioned attack and the breathiness of the tone. The pacing allows the listener to sink into the instrument's timbre. In track 12 is the Allegro movement. It's the second movement. I'm not sure if this is just a 2-movement work or if there are more. But this is a more lively movement with a quick slow pattern for the melody. And we're going to hear the instrument and the sample here. You don't think I'm going to let you go without hearing some Telemann, did you? Here we go. So this one isn't as naughty as the Bach sample that we heard, and not as keyboard-like. So I think Horsch has a little more freedom to accent the rhythm and really bounce around with it. The leaps between bass note and figuration in the high end is impressive in how the two voices are kept apart. Track 13, Jacob van Eyck, I guess, E-Y-C-K. It's a Dutch name. I don't know if that's going to be Eyck, or it could be something completely different. Who knows? Der Flötenlusthof, Volume 2, a piece called Buffon, and I have no idea what that means. This is played by a 6th flute in D by Thomas Stansby Jr., London, circa 1730 to 1740. So the 6th flute has a high, piercing tone. The rhythm of this has sort of a strolling pace as the instrument leaps into the high end from the mid-range for the melody. It's a solo piece with no accompaniment in this case, and it's a very cheerful work. Let's sample a bit of that and get this high piercing instrument. Yeah, charming. Tracks 14 to 15. Jacques Martin, Haute Terre, L'Art de Préluder, Opus 7, Part 5, for tenor recorder in C by probably Martin Haute Terre, who's related to Jacques Martin. Could even be him. Maybe it's a different Martin, I don't know. London, circa 1680 to 1700. So track 14, Prelude number 3 in G minor, Rondement. The work starts with the tenor recorder's lowest register, a sound worth hearing. I guess it's got a bit of a mournful quality to it. This is a work for solo recorder, and it's just under a minute in length. We almost heard all of it. Track 15, Prelude number 2 in C minor, marked Gay. This is even shorter at 33 seconds, and I like the low register contrast of both haute terre works after the high flute in the Ike piece. Track 16, Joseph Bodin de Bois-Mortier. Sonata for flute and violin, Opus 51 number 2, the fourth movement, Giga. This features Lucie Horsch on recorder, Rachel Padra on violin, and the instrument is a descant recorder in C by Richard Haka from Amsterdam, circa 1680 to 1690. There's another contrast here with a higher recorder. Padra sets a steady bass rhythm for the recorder to play over, though Horsch defines the rhythm as well with her fluttering tone. Yeah, I was nodding my head along to that rhythm. It's really well realized. Tracks 17 through 19, François Couperin, Concerts Royaux, Quatrième Concert in E minor. That's the fourth concerto in E minor. Lucie Horsch on the recorder, Tom Foster on harpsichord. We have three movements here, and they are middle movements, I think. Could be end movements, I'm not sure. But track 17 is the fifth movement, Sarabande, marked Très Tendrement. This is played with a voice flute in D in maple by Peter Bresson, London, circa 1700 to 1725. The melody starts in the instrument's low register and works its way up to the mid-range. The harpsichord has a higher chiming sound. The balance here is as in a live performance, with the quiet harpsichord suggesting its presence around the recorder's melody. Track 18 is the sixth movement, Rigodon, which is a kind of dance. Légèrement et marqué. Voice flute in D, made in boxwood here by Peter Bresson, London, circa 1700 to 1725. I liked the repeated notes on the recorder being separated by accents with the breath in this piece. You can hear the same type of harpsichord effect here as in the previous movement, so I will sample this one. Yeah, nice characterization there. It's a pretty unique sounding piece for the recorder. The repeated note is thematic throughout the movement, by the way. Track 19, the seventh movement, Forlan en Rondeau, marked Gaiement. This is played with a voice flute in D in maple, the one we really didn't sample in track 17. This is by Peter Bresson, London, circa 1700 to 1725. Dotted rhythm here, and in this movement, we're hearing the same instrument we heard on track 17. The dance rhythm is well evoked by Horsch's accents. Track 20, Nicolas Chedeville, Il Pastor Fido, Sonata number 6 in G minor, which was formerly attributed to Vivaldi as RV 58, the fourth movement, Allegro ma non presto. Lucie Horsch on recorder, Tom Foster harpsichord, and it's a soprano descant recorder in C by Robert Wijn Nijmegen, circa 1730 to 1750. That's another one of those Dutch names with a J in it that I'm not really sure how to say. This is interesting because Il Pastor Fido was originally published by Chedeville as a work by Antonio Vivaldi, no doubt to profit from Vivaldi's huge popularity in France. So he thought he'd just sell this work under Vivaldi's name and make a bit of a stash for himself. This was really very common at the time. Chedeville was a player and maker of musettes, which is a gentler sort of bagpipe, and his family intermarried with the haute terre musical family. Chedeville most likely learned wood-turning skills from his uncle, Louis Haute Terre. This has a vague Vivaldi character to it, but really doesn't sound like him. The instrument here is high up in the range, and the movement is in rondo form. Let's hear a little bit of it. Yeah, a very pretty tone there by Lucie Horsch. And you can tell this isn't by Vivaldi because it's just not virtuosic enough. Vivaldi and the Italian composers really pushing the technique of the players. Tracks 21 through 23, John Walsh, The Bird Fancier's Delight. And these are played on a sopranino in F by Benjamin Hallett, London circa 1730 to 1740. These are all very short works. They're all around 30 seconds long. Track 21 is The Bullfinch in F major. These are all bird songs within a structured melodic context. They're all solo, and they're all very brief. Track 22, Canary Bird in C minor. The canary song is still in that high range, but features a different melody. And track 23, The Linnet in C major. It's only 19 seconds long, and perhaps the most appealing, although they're all appealing. I thought we'd play this one, and you're going to get to hear the entire piece. It's only 19 seconds. Strap in. That's it. That's the whole thing. Very athletic there by Lucie Horsch, though. The character is fantastic, too. It's really appealing. Tracks 24 through 25, Georg Friedrich Handel. Recorder Sonata in F major, Opus 1, number 11, HW 369. Lucie Horsch on the recorder, Tom Foster on harpsichord. Track 24 is the first movement, Grave, for alto treble recorder in F by Peter Bresson, London, circa 1700 to 1725. Here the recorder is in its mid-range for the opening melody. The movement unfolds as you would expect a Handel melody to. It's pretty, and is really setting us up for the second movement, or in this case, the fourth movement. We skip the second and third movements and move to track 25, the fourth movement. Marked Allegro, alto treble recorder in F by Johann Heitz, Berlin, circa 1700 to 1730. This is a jig. It's appealingly played with a strong downbeat and some athleticism on Horsch's part. Let's hear the instrument and Horsch's playing. And the final track, track 26, Jacob van Eyck, again, Der Fluiten Lusthof, Volume 1. This piece is called Derde Daphne. The instrument is a tenor recorder in B-flat by Thomas Stansby Jr., London, circa 1730 to 1750. The melody starts in the low end. This is for solo recorder again. It's haunting in its tone and melody. And the piece stays that way until the end. It's an interesting end to the album, leaving us with just the sound of the solo recorder in our ears. And that's it, 26 tracks, imagine that. As you might imagine, there's nothing not to like here. It's an album of classical hits and a few unknown pieces that are nevertheless very likable. I generally don't like hearing albums with single movements of multi-movement works, but given the instrumentation, we couldn't really expect too many multi-movement works with all of the changes in mood and technique that they usually entail. What I really liked about this was the differing qualities of the recorders used, and that's really the focal point of the album and its entire purpose. Also, the seeming spontaneity of the performances. The need to record in 1 or 2 takes helps the interpretations immensely. On more than one occasion, a sudden change of key takes one by surprise in these interpretations, and it really sends a pleasurable shiver when they occurred. It sounds like they even surprised the players, too. Horsch may want to consider recording like this in future recordings. It was really appealing.
It's certainly an enjoyable program with a lot of Baroque and classical favorites mixed in with some less familiar selections as well. Horsch handles it all in stride with style and grace, with unique arrangements for various unique instruments. I particularly enjoyed the tone of the lower range instruments. They sound really rich.
Yeah, me too.
And her trills and other ornaments are done with a lot of flair. With the orchestra of the 18th century, the tempos for the allegro pieces are on the relaxed and stately side, which enhances the expression as well. And Horsch continues to widen the expressive possibilities for the recorder beyond my imagination, really. And I enjoyed that because that was the first instrument I ever played way back in elementary school, like a lot of people.
Yeah, I played the recorder a bit too. No, nothing like this, but just, learning a few, few easy tunes. All right, our second album, Americascapes 2, American Opus, by the Basque National Orchestra, conducted by Robert Trevino. And this is on the Ondine label, released on November 1st, 2024. So we're going way back here at the end of the year. I've had this one on my radar, too. Now, we heard Volume 1 of Americascapes way back on January 31st, 2022, on episode 48. I still remember it, though, like it was yesterday, even though it was like almost 2 years ago. Episode 48 was called Crafty Complications, by the way. So we've waited a long time for Volume 2, and finally here it is. And it's a bit of an oddball of an album.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in just a minute. Trevino is Mexican-American, raised and trained in Texas. This album was made in the Basque country for the Finnish record label Ondine. Truly an international endeavor.
Sure is, yeah.
Yeah. None of the pieces on this album are particularly well known, and of course that's what makes it ideal for adult music's classical segment.
Give us obscure.
Yeah, obscure. Not just obscure, but just music that, we want to stretch what people think classical music is a little bit. In a sophisticated way, not in a way that some new age person is trying to reinvent it. Anyway, tracks 1 through 3. George Walker, who lived 1922 to 2018. The piece is called Address for Orchestra, composed in 1959. This was Walker's first work for large ensemble. Walker had studied at the Curtis Institute of Music with Rosario Scalero, who also taught Samuel Barber, Lucas Foss, and Giancarlo Menotti. Trevino says of Walker's music and its use of American influences like folk music and gospel in a disfigured take-apart form that is a bit like looking at the Statue of Liberty in a cubist rendering, to the point that you can't easily tell that's what it is, but the spirit of liberty and freedom are clear. I really like that. The spirit comes through, even if you can't really tell what's happening. It's a compelling description, though to me this work doesn't fit with that particular description. Walker wrote, I believe, 4 symphonies, and they're more in line with that. They're a little more of a challenge, let's say. I don't like this word challenge, but you have to pay a bit more attention to them. This particular work, though, comes across as more conservative, and it was perhaps in line with what was being written in the U.S. at the time. It is, after all, Walker's first orchestra work, and this particular work references the Gettysburg Address in its title, so the address for orchestra is the Gettysburg Address. Trevino was specifically asked by George Walker before his death to record Address for Orchestra for him, and here Trevino has done that. We begin this 3-movement work with the first movement, track 1, Poco Adagio, moving to Molto più mosso. This has a mid-20th century American sound to it, in that it opens like a Copland work. It's got that big boned orchestration and these sense of wide open spaces. Let's hear it. Walker gets the entire orchestra in those first moments. The next theme features reed instruments, again giving that Copland flavor. The orchestration is attractive, each instrument given plenty of space to be heard, and that's also a nod to the conductor and orchestra as well as the engineer. It's spaciously orchestrated. The opening repeats briefly, then we head to a quieter, starlit episode after the 2-minute and 30-second mark. That opening call to attention is often returned to, acting as a sort of signpost for the movement. Bold timpani and brass feature briefly, then a more rhythmic section begins. There's a brief haunting flute episode at the 6-minute mark. Once the previous bolder section comes to an end, the movement crescendos to a bold ending. Bold is a good word for this particular movement. Track 2, Molto Adagio, has a languorous quality to it. The movement starts with low reeds, and I think that's a bassoon. The movement is brief and starts emitting an orchestral glow around the midpoint, so I'm going to get towards that. It's a fairly short movement at 2.5 minutes. I'll sample from around the 1-minute mark to hear some of that starlight. Maybe not what you think of when you think of starlight, but that's what came to mind at the time. I guess it acts as a separation between the first and third movements, sort of like a brief Vivaldi middle movement would have. Track 3 is the third and final movement, Drammatico, described by the booklet note as a sort of passacaglia, which means that there's a repeating bass. The repeating bass theme is heard in the strings, and is indeed Drammatico, as marked. Let's hear it. And that's the bass line. There's a lot more to the movement, though. Pianissimo winds come in at about the 45-second mark. It's got a slow forward motion, as is often the case with a passacaglia, although it's really just a series of sort of variations or varied material. We hear some echoes of the first movement just before the 3rd minute starts. The movement has an appealing way of morphing into different timbral combinations. The moment where the winds come in the 4th minute is appealing. The winds then continue into the 5th minute with staccato figures. There's a sudden crescendo to fortissimo to bring the piece to a dramatic ending. This is a fairly conservative piece for Walker. His symphonies are more adventurous, and it's immediately enjoyable, so it's a good way to be introduced to his music, I'd say, and then move on to the symphonies after that. Track 4, George Crumb, a composer that has always interested me because of his very odd sound palettes. He lived 1929 to 2022. This piece is called A Haunted Landscape, written in 1984, and I've never heard this before, so I was really thrilled to be able to hear it here. This was written for the New York Philharmonic. The work includes 20 percussion instruments, and the theater and music scholar Thomas May said about this piece, Crumb's palette has a precision of nuance and specificity that brings Takemitsu's sound gardens to mind, while his subtle alterations of color from one source to another are akin to Schoenberg's and Webern's painting with Klangfarben melody, which literally means tone-color melody. And what that is when you have a melodic line or a line and you assign each note to a different sort of instrument It sounds really cool. Trevino sees Crum's music as impressionistic. So do I, actually, in this case, especially. It's much more about sound sculpting and landscapes than harmonic or formal rigor. Crum's music is very original, and we hear the difference immediately in the prepared piano bass that opens this piece. The appeal here is in the muted sounds we hear in the opening. You'll need a quiet space to hear this piece. Crum's pianissimo dynamic here is extreme. The piece's first 3 minutes feature distant strains and rumblings, with some sudden crescendos to forte in the percussion and brass, until at 3 minutes and 30 seconds there's a brass fanfare that starts a staccato quarter note pattern. It's hard to pick a spot to sample as this piece just keeps changing, but overall the work has a pianissimo dynamic too, which makes it hard. I'll have to go for something relatively quiet here, so I'll sample from around the 5 minute and 15 second mark, and I'll have to boost the volume way up. Hopefully you can hear it. Now, the piece is called A Haunted Landscape, and the impression I get is as though you're looking at one of these old, big haunted houses with a lot of land through a gate, and all of the hauntedness is sort of far away from you. You know what I mean? It doesn't sound like up close. It's not like being in the haunted house or something like that. In the 7th minute, a Stravinsky-an rite of spring bassoon line emerges briefly. What we really hear for most of the work is distant, haunting sounds, suiting the title perfectly. At the 8 minute and 30 second mark, there's a sudden fortissimo pounding on the bass drum and squealing high winds. The quarter note staccato pattern we heard earlier comes back, followed by distant bell-like percussion and ominous string and brass patterns. By the 10th minute, the piece is consistently in a louder dynamic. Let's hear some of the interesting sounds that emanate from the ensemble at around that point. Yeah, I love those brass sounds in there. By the way, Russ, what did Mrs. Russ think of this piece?
This one I enjoyed all by myself with the headphones on, actually. Yeah.
A wise choice.
Yeah, I wouldn't think this is a good date night selection here.
In the 11th minute, the dynamic has softened and once again suggests distant, haunted sounds, and pretty much plays out this way to the end. This is a sensitive performance by Trevino and the orchestra, who provide great advocacy for the work. It's not the only recording of it. There is a complete George Crumb set out there, released by the Bridge label in the U.S., but this is really a high-class version of this piece. Tracks 5 through 8, Silvestre Revueltas, 1899 to 1940. This is his ballet La Coronella, or The Lady Colonel. Composed in 1940 and left incomplete at Revueltas' death, it was reconstructed by Eduardo Hernandez Moncada and Jose Limantur. This is going to need some background. Revueltas distinguished himself as a child prodigy in his native Mexico, studied violin and composition in gangster-era Chicago, served as concertmaster for something called the Aztec Theater Orchestra in San Antonio, Texas, fought alongside the communists in the Spanish Civil War, returned to Mexico where he drifted in and out of mental hospitals, lived poor, and died at 40 years old of alcoholism. He never got to hear this, his final work, which received its premiere a few months after its composer's death. Revueltas received the commission in 1939 from Mexico's Fine Arts Ballet. The production was inspired by the horrific engravings of the illustrator José Guadalupe Posada, and the story is said to have concerned a people's revolution that overthrew an oppressive regime in a country that might be Mexico. After that, the work is shrouded in mystery, and it is even unclear how much of it Revueltas wrote himself. The story goes that a younger Mexican composer named Bias Galindo, who lived 1910 to 1993, completed the last movement of La Coronella entitled El Juicio Final, or The Last Judgment. La Coronella was then orchestrated by Candelario Huizar, but the version played at its world premiere on November 23, 1940, disappeared soon after, along with all of the composer's sketches. Nearly 2 decades later, conductor José Limantour decided to reconstruct the score, and that reconstruct is in parentheses. Though Limantour was very familiar with Revueltas' music, it's a fair question as to how closely the work we have here resembles the original version, as the Revueltas score and sketches seem to have never been recovered. Still, it's a pleasure to have any more from this composer to listen to. The cultural historian and concert producer Joseph Horowitz said of Revueltas' musical language, it is a churning kaleidoscope of mestizaje, the mixture of ethnic and cultural groups in Mexico's history, bristling with the grit and energy of Mexican streets, streaming with poetic folklore and song. I should also mention and Stravinsky. There's a lot of Stravinsky in here, combined with some odd Mexican moments.
Yes.
It's really interesting. Track 5, Los Privilegiados, or The Privileged. But I want to mention, I heard this on Deezer, and Deezer has a completely different listing for this track. It's not called Los Privilegiados there. It's called Damitas de Aqualice Tiempos. This starts with a percussive outburst followed by a ticking rhythm. All sorts of orchestral outbursts interrupt this, sounding like they're from different genres or eras. And I noticed quite a bit of Stravinsky in here, particularly Petrushka, his ballet about the puppets that come to life. Let's sample a bit of this from around the 1 minute and 15 second mark. Not only is the technique similar to Stravinsky's Petrushka, but some of the themes seem like they're almost lifted from that ballet. The tableau has a quicksilver quality to it. I wonder what a ballet to this music would have looked like. There are 19th century elements to the score as well, especially from the 2 minute and 30 second mark. The tableau suddenly stops at the end. Track 6, the second tableau. Tableau would just mean a scene, I guess, in a ballet score. Los Desheredados, or the Disinherited. A pounding, foreboding bass drum beats out an ominous rhythm as the orchestra piles up imposing patterns. Let's hear the opening. Great brass there as well. The pounding bass drum continues up to the 3rd minute when brass take over, and here I'm reminded of Bartók's brass writing. It's one of many examples in this score of Revueltas absorbing everything happening musically in his era. The rhythm in this section has an aggression that could be more forcefully put across. A lighter section comes in to lighten the mood, though, but it's constantly interrupted by more urgent forte patterns. I hear echoes of Stravinsky, most of all in the movement's final minutes, though there are other dance elements as well. The constant changes of scene and mood remind me again of Petrushka. I wouldn't say the music is derivative, though. The originality is in the content. Track 7, La Pesadilla de Don Ferruco, or Don Ferruco's Nightmare. This is the third tableau. Don Ferruco's Nightmare seems to involve a split personality between European and Mexican modes of dance. This starts as a romantic ballroom dance straight out of the 19th century. There are noticeable mariachi elements too. See if you can pull them out of this. And we melt from the mariachi brass right back into the romantic ballroom dance. I'm guessing that the mariachi part is the nightmare. I wonder why you would choose that. The theme at 2 minutes and 15 seconds sounds like a Mexican folk dance, and I want to sample that too, because this is really where we get a bit of Revueltas' background, although he would probably claim that he absorbed musical language from all cultures. European and Mexican elements are juxtaposed Petrushka-like throughout the tableau. They are butted up against each other more frequently in the last 2 minutes of the tableau, building up to a splash that leads directly into the final tableau, El Juicio Final, which it's doubtful this is by Revueltas, we're not really sure. This means the Last Judgment. It starts tumultuously with Mexican dance elements peeking out of the orchestral texture. The orchestration features a lot of light percussion, including the mid-20th century defining xylophone. This instrument, for some reason, was only used in that era. This proceeds in exciting style with aggressive rhythm and forte dynamics. Yeah, if you ever take a music listening test and you hear a xylophone, just guess 1940. You have a good chance of being right, or around that decade. Anyway, let's hear a sample of this. I really enjoyed the very subtle bass thumps at the beginning of that sample. The music has those quicksilver changes we've been hearing throughout the work. This would be an exhausting ballet to watch, not to mention perform. But the entirety of the material aggressively presses forward with its rhythm until just after the 3-minute mark, where a desolate sustained chord brings the activity to a halt. Suddenly, light pianissimo themes are heard by the 4th minute. Revueltas uses the entire orchestral palette, right down to variations of timbre on individual instruments. A crescendo in the 6th minute brings the material to a rolling boil. Then we hear taps. The song Taps from the military, played by a trumpet at a 7-minute mark from the American military. I guess things didn't end well in the ballet, and the previous section, Taps, is usually played at a funeral. The piece then continues with a heavenly sort of light, saturated string waltz. A solo violin plays with double-stopped harmony, then lightens to a romantic melody. A timpani roll leads to imposing fortissimo chords. The piece ends brassily with Mexican themes. That's the end of the album. This is a really odd program of rarely heard music, and it doesn't necessarily fit together into a program. Each work seems to contrast with all of the others, and perhaps that's the point. The United States has been called a cultural melting pot, but sometimes those separate cultures don't blend together. In fact, they often don't, and that's a lot of what Elliott Carter's music is about. That seems to be the case here. All three works featured are highly interesting and worth a hearing. The Walker piece isn't completely characteristic of his mature music. It sounds like a piece for a public American occasion, and its Gettysburg Address theme invites the big-boned sound of American music of the time. I'm always interested in George Crumb's musical invention, and this piece was as mysterious as the title suggested. I think I was most compelled by the final two movements, or tableau, of Revueltas's La Coronella. The constantly shifting European and Mexican themes fascinated me, and the hodgepodge of ideas that never stopped coming at you in the final movement were bewildering in an enjoyable way. So while I think this is an odd program, I found it to be entertaining in the way an amusement park haunted house is. You just don't know what's around the next corner.
Definitely a unique program here. The Walker is a big-sounding work, but it's not dense. What I mean is that even in full orchestral passages, the scoring isn't dense, so individual parts and movement in line can be followed. There's a lot of power in the brass and percussion that's balanced out by the more playful woodwinds. I enjoyed it. The crumb really does sound scary. I like the frightened or frightening trombones. They didn't show up in your sample, but those are pretty interesting when they come along. It does create the illusion of navigating a landscape of eerie sounds, maybe like a drone flying over a haunted property.
I think New Jersey listeners will probably appreciate this piece a lot at this point.
And the Revueltas is full of contrasts of all types. The first movement has battling sections of the orchestra with rapid tempo and meter changes. The second movement seemed like a new work with a Mexican waltz at the start, and the last two movements have cacophony, march-like sections. Then taps comes along, and there's a solo violin lullaby passage. It's really quite interesting and hard to see how it all fits together, but it's definitely got constantly changing scenes that'll hold your interest.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, how does America fit together? We don't know, but sometimes we do. All right, our last contemporary music album of the year is an album called Undiscovered Trumpet Concertos, played by Paul Neebe on the trumpet, with the Budafok Dohnáyi Orchestra, conducted by Mladen Tarbuk. Again, probably names I'm all mispronouncing, but I'm just sounding them out. We also have a trumpet guest in Thomas Bithell. I'll mention him when he comes up. This is on Albany Records, an American record label, and was released on December 13th, so it's pretty recent. Tracks 1 through 5 is a work by Enhard Schneider. He's German and was born in 1950, and the piece is called Longing for Ancient Times, and that's exactly what this work does. Schneider describes what he does as cross-culture composing, which could mean both creative communication with contexts of past times, the historical dimension, and we get a bit of that here, and with other cultural circles, geographical dimensions, and that's actually written into this piece. This particular work musically describes the most famous historical corners of Romantic Germany. And let's underline that word romantic. Not only are the landscapes romantic, but so is the music, even though this is a contemporary work. Each movement quotes typical melodies of folk music, oscillating between concertante aspirations and romantic longing as songs that have become a cultural identity. Track 1 is the first movement of this 5-movement work, called Heidelberg. Germany's oldest university is in Heidelberg. It's the epitome of old Germany. The music reflects the dark, wildly romantic atmosphere of Heidelberg Castle, and eventually leads to the well-known student song Gaudeamus Igitur. This has a ringing, noble trumpet entry at the beginning. It's attractive, straightforward music making with the solo part beautifully played by Neebe. The language puts itself squarely in the 19th century, probably reflecting Heidelberg's romantic atmosphere. The trumpet line features quite a few light fanfares, and surely that's the student song at around the 3-minute mark. It's a nostalgic melody. Let's hear a bit of that too. You can imagine a crowd of students singing that out in unison. Track 2, the second movement, The Lorelei, is a legendary 132-meter high rock in the middle Rhine Valley. The whirlpools and reefs around the rock are so dangerous they have caused many ships to wreck and people to drown. Heinrich Heine thematized the Lorelei in a poem as a long-haired mermaid who sings so beautifully that the skippers are compelled and steer toward the deadly passage, sort of like the sirens in Greek mythology. The melody is by Friedrich Silcher in the folk tune. The work opens with the trumpet fanfare figures and mysterious light tremolos in the orchestra, producing a mysterious sound evoking a magical world. The trumpet's theme is another folk-like melody, apparently the Friedrich Silcher melody mentioned above. And of course, that's got a 6/8 rhythm evoking the undulating waves. Track 3, the third movement, Walpurgis Night. Walpurgis Night is celebrated as a meeting of witches and the devil, in which ritual sexual debauchery is alleged to fertilize the soil. The witches' Sabbath was popularized as Walpurgis Night by Goethe's Faust Part 1. At the end of the piece, the folk song Der Mai ist gekommen, or May has come, is heard. The movement starts with similar mysterious sounds to the previous movement, but the tone has become a bit more ominous here. It's still dangerous, but ominous rather than enchanted. The trumpet has another fanfare-like theme that ends with quick repeated notes. He then goes into a triplet pattern in the first minute that the orchestra picks up. There's a folk-like melody toward the end of the second minute. Then the piece ends with a light fanfare. Let's hear that folk-like melody. Track 4, Säckingen, is located on the High Rhine in the south of the Black Forest and is known as the Trumpeter's Town. The trumpeter welcomes everyone with his famous song, Behüt dich Gott, es wär so schön gewesen, which means God bless you, it would have been so beautiful. That's such a German sentiment. This starts with a rather downcast but attractive trumpet theme. which then leads to a prolonged melody that clearly resolves at the end. The whole work has been highly romantic, and this is perhaps the most romantic movement of all of them. It has a nostalgic quality to it. Neebe gets a sensitive tone to his final statement of the movement, going smoothly up to a high note. The movement ends with a sudden, surprisingly ominous tone. Track 5, the final movement, Rothenburg ob der Tauber, is located on the edge of Bavaria and is one of the most beautiful towns in Germany. Many films have been shot there. The Swabian folk song Muss I denn zum Städtele hinaus, or Must I Go to the Little Town, can be heard here. The song became well known internationally via the English translation by H.W. Dulken, Must I Then, from the Town in 1856, and received worldwide distribution when Elvis Presley recorded it in 1960 under the title Wooden Heart in the film G.I. Blues. Elvis had learned it during his military service in both Heidelberg and Bad Nauheim. The trumpet gets to stretch out a bit at the beginning of the movement. He works up a bit of speed at parts. At 1 minute and 31 seconds, the Swabian folk song melody begins. We have to sample that because Elvis sang it. So here we go. I have to say I don't recognize it. I haven't seen G.I. Blues, at least not in a long time. It falls easily on the ear, though. It takes over the middle of the movement, and the more searching, anxious opening theme comes back in this ABA form movement afterwards. I could swear I hear a bit of the opening chromatic motive from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde in there, stated near the 5-minute mark. As the movement ends, we hear one more happy statement of the folk song before the final chord. Tracks 6 through 8, Slovakian composer Josef Podprocky, 1944 to 2021, concert piece for trumpet and orchestra, 2016 to 2018. I don't speak Slovakian, so I'm sure I didn't get that name right, but I hope it's close. This was commissioned by Paul Neebe in the summer of 2016 and completed in 2018. Podprocky's musical language is based on patterns of European musical modernism, especially from widespread tonal music thinking. You can hear combinations of folklore elements with polymodal and 12-tone organization. The notes don't say anything specific about this particular piece, but we'll try to pull some things out. The first movement, track 6, Allegro risoluto, has a nice orchestral build-up at the beginning, and the trumpet surprisingly comes in with a sort of rallying the horses to charge fanfare. There's a second theme, quieter and more harmonically unfocused and wandering. The trumpet part here eventually focuses into a solid melody, and a martial feel from the orchestra leads to a pause. After this, we get some mysterious wafting strings, and there's a lot of shifting of mood and material in this movement. Over the course of about 2 minutes, this builds up via crescendo to another pause, followed by a quiet staccato creeping accompaniment as the trumpet solo brings this to another sudden pause. This repeats until the trumpet tries to take charge at just before the 4-minute mark. At this point, it sounds like the trumpet is making all of the decisions as the accompanying orchestra follows. At 5 minutes and 45 seconds, the trumpet gets a sort of cadenza with occasional harmonic underpinnings from the orchestra. There's nothing terribly virtuosic about the trumpet's material. It's mostly melodic and firm. As the movement approaches its end, there's a slow gathering of forces to a common end in the orchestra as the trumpet rallies the troops with a repeating figure. The ending has an off-kilter waltz feel to it, and the movement does suddenly find a resolving chord and suddenly ends. Track 7, the second movement, Lento Meditazione. Let's just sample the beginning of this before I say anything about it. It sounds like a vibraphone takes over towards the end. So you have that spacious treading accompaniment accompanying the now distant trumpet, who rhapsodizes a continuous line. After this, a steady sustained harmony in the orchestra underpins the trumpet as he contemplates the figure he's playing. In the third minute, a flute picks up the trumpet's theme and gets some time in the spotlight. The trumpet grows even more distant, sounding like he's embedded in the orchestra as he plays his solo line. The presence of a vibraphone sounds throughout the movement and comes in to separate episodes. At the end, we get one more rising vibraphone figure as the orchestra comes in moodily, and the trumpet grumpily ends the movement with a loud figure. Track 8, the third movement, Allegro Pressante. At the opening, we get wisps of folk-like material from the orchestra that seem unable to complete the idea. The trumpet comes in and plays a full theme, and the orchestra threatens to run out of rhythmic steam when he finishes. It sounds like it's rhythmically lurching forward under the confident trumpet. The trumpet drags the orchestra to a final emphatic note in the section, then the vibraphone returns to introduce what I guess is a coda. It's mysterious and harmonically murky. One more vibraphone entry and a crescendo brings the work to an energetic ending. Let's hear that ending. Okay, so some pretty virtuosic trumpet playing there at the end. Track 9, Carl Roscott, American, 1953 to 2008, Fantasia for two trumpets. This work was originally for two trumpets and piano, written in 1985 and posthumously transcribed by Jan Bach in 2015 for full orchestra. Interestingly, the first performance was at the 1985 International Trumpet Guild Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The first and second trumpet soloists at that performance were Northern Illinois University professor Ronald Modell and University of Missouri professor Betty Scott. NIU professor Stephen Squires provided the piano accompaniment. The audience featured nearly 1,000 trumpet players from around the world. The work is written in the style of Bartók and Mahler. It includes a series of call and responses, dovetailing in the most technical sections, and is a challenging piece for trumpeters to perform. And I should say, naturally, the 1,000 trumpet players in the audience really loved it. The second trumpeter on this, by the way, is Thomas Bithell, playing along with Paul Neebe on the first trumpet. The piece starts energetically with the two trumpets playing out over accented chords in the orchestra. The theme that emerges out of this has an appealing, fun sound to it. The harmony gives it a kind of klezmer feel at times, but I'm not sure that's the intention. It disappears, and impressive unison repeating notes sound on the trumpets, and we get more klezmer-like material. Let me sample this from around 1 minute and 30 seconds in. Yeah, I think that sort of klezmer-sounding material is probably the Mahlerian part of the style, because Mahler used a lot of popular sort of rhythms and melodies in his symphonies. I hope everybody realizes how difficult to play what you just heard was. It's not just that you need really rapid and clean articulation, but the two trumpeters have to keep an absolute time, so I thought that was really impressive playing. In the second minute, a more exotic rhythm emerges, reminding me of the coffee section in Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. One of the trumpets gets a melody over this. By the fourth minute, the rhythm has morphed into something more aggressive, and the trumpets have more filigree work. This is indeed an impressive performance from the two trumpeters. So much of this work is played in quick harmonic figures between the two. A section ends at 6 minutes and 10 seconds with an appealing fanfare. I'm going to sample that as well. Wow, that's not the end of the piece, though. One of the nice things about this, if you're listening in stereo, you can hear the separation of the two trumpets in the in your earphones as well. It's really an enjoyable effect. After this, the two trumpets get a cadenza in which they dovetail their lines and engage in call and response. This ends with the return of the Tchaikovsky coffee rhythm in the 7th minute. Energy picks up in the 8th minute as the orchestra and trumpets start steaming forward. The klezmer theme from the beginning comes back. Quick trumpet flourishes bring the piece to an end, and I was impressed by the ending too, so let's hear that also. Yeah, so 3 samples from that one piece. You can tell this was a piece that really knocked me out. There's a lot to enjoy in it. The final piece on the album is by Terry Midzesko. This is track 10. He was born in North Carolina in 1946. He's a contemporary composer. His Lamento for Don Quixote, which is 12 variations. It's a set of 12 variations on a ground bass in quasi-neo-Baroque style with Spanish and Italian highlights. It was commissioned in 2005 by Michelle Hudson for the birthday of her husband, trumpeter Tim Hudson. The inspiration comes from a recording of the Chicago Symphony with Fritz Reiner performing Richard Strauss's Don Quixote. Oh, by the way, with Christmas coming, if you don't know what to get your significant other for their present, why not commission a piece of music for them and have it performed? I don't know, on their birthday or for next Christmas or something like that. The work starts out with an opening gesture reminding me of the main theme of Rodrigo's Guitar Concerto's famous middle movement. I associate this with Spain due to that work, and that's certainly the intention here. It's that opening theme that gets the variations, so let's hear the opening theme. Yeah, I should mention Rodrigo's guitar concerto is titled Concierto de Aranjuez, and that opening reminds me of that second movement. The first variation is highly lyrical and rather amiable. The strings start the second variation. It seems that the variations all resolve at the end and then start up anew, so they're very easy to follow. The second variation has a soft glow to it, and the next one contrasts by being more active with a chugging rhythm in the strings. All of the variations may be neo-Baroque, but they come across in a romantic phrasing. It's all comfortable and immediately appealing. The variations follow one another comfortably, and in the 7th minute, by this point I've lost count of the variations, the Rodrigo motif comes back and is a major part of that particular variation. Strings are very present in the variations that follow, and the work ends tranquilly with a gentle rendering of the Rodrigo motif theme. So the common denominator in these 4 works is the soloist and his style of playing. There's something Baroque/romantic about Paul Neebe's tone here that makes it fall comfortably on the ear. It's slightly burnished, not a ringing tone for the most part. He has a good sense for shaping melodies so that they come across with maximum appeal. Indeed, all of these works are agreeable to listen to. The Enhard Schneider piece does indeed long for ancient times in its harmony and figuration and melodic quality. The Podproki concerto piece has a quicksilver quality to it, changing texture and even harmonic style rapidly from section to section, yet it still manages to be appealing. I can imagine that the Roscott piece for 2 trumpets made such a big splash. It's got virtuosic playing and a few musical touchstones that give the listener something to hold on to. It was my favorite work on the album because it had many highlights in its various sections. And the Mizesco is a good send-off for the album, featuring gentle variations with a Spanish tinge to them. There's plenty to enjoy on the album. For the most part, the music is on the lighter, more conservatively harmonic side, but listeners looking for something new and accessible will surely find that here.
It's an engaging, accessible program of modern and contemporary works for trumpet. The Schneider covers a lot of musical moods with a German geographic theme. The Podproki has modern and interesting harmony that satisfies with traditional instincts and familiar compositional directions. The Roscott was entertaining and has nice harmonies in the 2 trumpet parts. I thought the 2 players were matched tonally and technically really well. It was a really well-balanced performance. And the Mizesco is real trumpet ear candy with lush harmonies and a showcase for Neebe's rich tone. And that's his real charm as a player. He does make the technical difficulties sound easy, but his tone is what you'll remember and make you want to listen to this again and again.
Yeah.
Over on the jazz side, get your passport ready for an international sax tour. And we're going to start out in Poland with the Alan Balcerowski Quintet. The recording is called Looking Ahead. It's on Multikulti Project Jazz Series label, and it came out December 6th. Alan Balcerowski graduated from the Felix Nowowiejski Academy of Music, receiving his Master of Arts degree in 2019. He plays soprano, alto, and tenor saxophones, as well as transverse flute, alto and piccolo flute, and clarinet and bass clarinet. In 2020, he founded the Alan Balcerowski Quintet, performing original compositions, and he's played at various jazz festivals, and also he's active as an educator. On this recording, Alan Balcerowski on flute, tenor, and soprano saxophones, and also the recording is made of his original compositions. Alto and tenor saxophones, Mikołaj Winke. On piano, Michał Gozdek. On bass, Antoni Olszewski. And on drums, Kamil Misiewski. It was recorded July 19th and 20th, 2023 at Monochrome Studio, recorded by Ignacy Grustki, mixed and mastered by Piotr Taraskowicz, and produced by Alan Balcerowski, executive producer Thomas Convent. The recording is going to start out with Give It a Rest, a drum roll and a hit Get It Going into a pickup line to the minor melody. It's in unison with Balcerowski on flute and Winke on tenor sax. The structure is interesting. There's a 12-measure section, a 20-measure section that starts off similarly and turns brighter, and then an ending 12-measure section like the first part with the start to Balcerowski's flute solo. Let's hear it get going. Yeah, that's sounding really good already. Let's come back in to check out some of his flute solo. Nice articulation and sense of space. Gosdek follows with a piano solo with a clear but smooth touch on running lines that gets some backing lines from the winds, and Vinky is next on tenor sax with a husky tone, building ideas from shorter phrases and including some passionate cries. The ending melody section has some exciting new lines that surprise you at the end. It's a cool tune to start the recording. Track 2 is Night Storm. Olszewski starts it out on bass and gets joined by piano and drums. He outlines what happens under the sax melody to come, a 16-measure section with repeated pulsing bass notes, just 2, and then a second section with more moving harmony. Then the saxes come in on top of that same pattern with legato lines. It sounds like Balcerowski on tenor on the right and Vinky on the alto on the left. Let's take a listen. Balcerowski's up for a solo first with snappy phrases that match the pulsing rhythm and weaving in and out of the harmonies nicely. It slips into more of a driving swing with walking bass and ride cymbal. He works into the upper register with nice tone. The driving pulse falls away for Vinky's solo to get started, and he gets to really work it up gradually. Let's come in just before it shifts to the driving swing and he gets a full head of steam. There's some really nice intensity there. Mashevsky gets some drum fun from there, cheered on by the saxes before a return to the legato sax melody. Track 3, the title track, Looking Ahead, a ballad with a long evolving melody. Balcerowski is on tenor here and Vinky on alto. Their lines weave from unison to harmonized parts over bass and cymbal textures. Piano adds decorative rising ripples when it enters. It's delicate, pretty, and unpredictable. Balcerowski solos first on this tune. There is a set tempo, but enough space for a sense of weightlessness, and his phrases seem to float. Vinky follows on alto, keeping the same stretching of line effect. The drums kick in some more rhythmic energy. Let's check out some of Gozdek's piano solo on this one that develops in a nice arc. Nice ideas for both hands. Olszewski gets a bass solo here too with a deep, rich tone, and the saxes are back for the ending of the melody line. It's the longest track on the recording at almost 11.5 minutes. Track 4, Take Up. This is a trio tune with Balcerowski on flute and piano and bass, no drums. Balcerowski starts it with a solo flute intro phrase and then gets into the melody and takes 2 solo rounds. Some nice snappy bass there from Olszewski carrying the rhythm along on his own here. Gozdek gets a piano solo too with some rhythmic flute backing lines. and Olszewski gets a little section for bass to pop out in before the final flute melody. Track 5, Out to Breakfast. Well, Eric Dolphy had Out to Lunch, and here they're going out to breakfast. This minor tune has a Mingus-like quality to it, starting with a big hit and more syncopated hits coming along. Balcerowski is on flute and Vinkian's on alto sax. There's a main 10-measure melody section that repeats, and then a 4-measure section of descending flute and sax lines before we hear the first section again. Mickey solos first, with fun swirling figures and impassioned cries. Balcerowski switches to soprano sax for his solo here. Let's hear him on this new horn. I'll join in midway so we can catch some of his high reaches. Gazdeck gets a piano solo on this one as well, with a lot of darting lines that get some wind backing, and they wrap it up with a final run through the melody. Track 6 is Protzer. Gazdeck provides a lush rubato solo piano opening. When flute and sax come in, it's in a waltz tempo for the unison melody line that's just 16 measures before Olszewski is off on a melodic bass solo with snappy articulation. I'll give you one long sample on this one so we can hear all of that. Balcerowski solos next on flute with fluttery lines. Gazdak has a piano solo on this one too, and Mishevsky gets to work around the kit over piano chords and bass a bit before some shorter flute and sax lines lead into a final time through the melody. Track 7, Irena, drum toms hit it into a couple rounds of a quirky 12-bar blues melody with playful sax and flute lines. Balcerowski is out of the gate for a flute solo. Let's hear this one get going. He keeps the ideas coming for more choruses. Vinky has a different idea for the start of his alto sax solo and has a lot of fun working to an intense climax. Let's check some of his solo out. That was a lot of fun. Gazdak gets the last solo on piano, and Mishevsky gets to trade off on the drums with some new lines of flute and sax before they return to the blues melody. And the recording ends up with track 8, Response, Vinky on alto and Balcerowski on tenor sax for this one. The melody has a lot of rhythmic change-ups and weaving sax lines into a Latin beat. It's kind of an AABA form, but the first section is 12 measures, and after the repeat, the middle section comes a measure earlier for 9 measures before the A pattern again. Vinky solos first. Let's hear one more from Balcerowski on this final track. Gazdic gets a solo with some fun backing sax lines. After the first section of the melody comes back, they stretch things out with some vamping from Mishevsky to get some drum work in. I haven't given him any sample time yet, so let's check that out before we finish. And that's it. A sax-packed recording from Poland. This was really enjoyable. Balcerowski's compositions have a freshness to them with some interesting structures and arrangements, but have enough familiar elements of swinging rhythms, Latin beats, ballads, and blues to be quite comfortable. He sounds at home on tenor, soprano, and flute with a rounded, warm tenor sax tone. Vinky complements nicely with his alto sax and playful solo approach. On the first track, his more gruff tenor tone was great too. Both players take an exploratory approach to their solos that went to a lot of interesting musical places. The rhythm section has good synergy throughout with a balance of solo spots for Olszewski on bass and imaginative piano solos from Gazdic.
In this album, they had like fairly laid-back tempos. They were at mid-tempo to a slower tempo most of the time, and yet the solos were highly active and even like aggressive. For me, it was a really interesting juxtaposition. Alan Balcerowski solos prettily on flute, and to be honest, I couldn't always tell which saxophonist was him, but he seemed to stretch out more on the sax, as opposed to the flute, as did Mikołaj Wienka. Out to Breakfast featured the most chance-taking solos, I thought. Perhaps what they mean by the title is that they're playing on Eric Dolphy's title Out to Lunch without going completely off the rails. Michel Gazdic on the piano keeps things on earth with his solos, acting as contrast to the two saxophones, and Kamil Myslewski is a hard-hitting drummer when he gets a chance to solo, and Antoni Ojzewski drums satisfyingly in his solos. I've already had my Polish pronunciation judged, by the way, so I'm just not concerned anymore. And he leaves a lot of space. This is an enjoyable and occasionally ear-tugging listen.
Yeah. Get the passport ready again. We're going to go over to one of our favorite places, Greece.
Yeah, I love Greece.
For saxophonist Dimitris Tsakas's Conversation Helps. This is released by himself. It came out December 5th. Dimitris Tsakas studied at Berklee College of Music with teachers such as Andy McGee, Jerry Bergonzi, George Garzone, and Steve Wilson. He's one of the biggest names on the Greek jazz scene. Also, he's known for working with Academy Award winner composer Vangelis Papathanassiou of Chariots of Fire fame. He's featured as a soloist on his Blade Runner Trilogy 25th Anniversary album. Tsakas's previous recordings as a leader include Growing Up, which was recorded in New York, A Man Dreams, and Back of Beyond. And he's been featured on over 200 albums over various genres. And we've heard him as a guest on a couple recordings. Going back to episode 64, Menage a Trio, I think that's when all of our Greek jazz exploration started with Yakavos Simonidis' Jaco Organ Trio's Safe Place. That came out back in April of 2022 with the great George Contraforis on organ. We heard him again in episode 132, Debuts and Discoveries, as a guest on pianist Paris Gagastathis' quintet album Introspective. On bass on this recording, Kimon Karotzis, and we've heard him before as well back in episode 61, Mallet Maestros, an album that Mike liked a lot, Dimitris Angelicus' Long Way Home. And on drums, Alex Dracos Kostakis, who we heard in episode 87, Fall Frets, on guitarist Apostolos Levantopoulos' After the Spirit. So, some familiar faces from our many Greek jazz recordings that we featured. This recording is produced by Dimitris Tsakas, executive producers Theodore Bafalokis and Dimitris Fetis, recorded at Sierra Studios on April 27th and 28th, 2024. Recording engineers Ilias Kostsolieras and George Kariotis, mixing engineer Yannis Tontis, mastering engineer Paul Stefanidis, and mastered at Viking Lounge Mastering. The recording notes say the concept for this album was born during a rehearsal with my friends and musical partners Alex and Kimon as we explored the themes of composition, performance, and creativity in Greece. Through our discussions, I realized that conversation helps. And also, the album cover here, if you can take a look at it, is a painting that was made by Tsakas' mother. So take a look at that. It's called Genesis. All right, all original compositions here by Dimitris Tsakas, and we start out with Lost in Tradition. Tsakas is on soprano sax here with an appealing tone. The whole tune is done in rubato fashion, sometimes seeming like it will set into a more steady rhythm. The minor melody is longing, and it has a folk-like quality in spots. Karotzis sometimes joins in sync with the bass on phrases. Let's take a listen. It moves into soft exchanges between sax phrases and drums and bass in a conversational manner. Let's hear a little bit of that further on in the tune. After returning to the melody, it ends with soft solo sax phrases. Track 2, KD Blues, a switch to alto sax for this tune. The melody is a 20-measure construction with some bluesy phrases. They go around twice, the bass switching up between snappy figures and fast walking underneath with delicate cymbals dancing along. Let's hear it into Tsakas getting into improvisations. works into really charging phrases, and then the push falls away for Karotzis to get started on a rhythmic bass improvisation. Back to the start of the melody there, that works into some vamping for Tsakas to work around the drum kit. Track 3, Graduate Unemployment. This starts with a solo alto sax exploration for the first minute. And the main melody is slow and mysterious. Let's have a little listen to that as well. Karotzis has a bass solo with some neat interval play, and after Tsakas is back with more melody, Tsakas has a drum solo centered around tom tones. Track 4 is Scale Issues, a more rhythmic tune. This starts out with a repeating 8-measure melody idea with a rising sax line over a clicky beat. There's a surprising harmonic change in the bass at the end of the line. Then it moves into a longer, more syncopated figure section before Tsakas is off on flurries of improvisations. After the solo, there's a repeat of the original 16-measure melody, and then Tsakas is off on more improvisations, and there's a sudden, unexpected change to a chugging, walking bass line swing feel. Let's hear a little bit of that. That feel keeps going, and as you can hear there, the tune ends up changing to a 12-bar blues format, coming to a cute ending. Track 5, the title track, Conversation Helps, and speaking of changes, this one starts out with a rubato alto sax melody over ringing bass that suddenly introduces a speedy tempo with repeated notes and intervals. There are more changes to come, though, with a cool loping bass figure as well. It goes through that pattern of sections repeatedly as a basis for Tsakas' improvisations. Let's check out some of his improvisations at the end when Karotzis turns the bass figure we just heard into a funky ostinato. Track 6 is New Rules. Back to soprano sax for this one. It has kind of a New Orleans beat to it, but seems to switch up between 4 and 2-beat measures. The sax melody is cute and bluesy with a little nod to John Coltrane. Tsakas has some solo drum time before Tsakas is back with improvisations. After another time through the melody, Tsakas gets some more improvisation time as the feel switches up with walking bass. Let's hear it from that point to the end. And a little bit of Love Supreme ending there. Track 7, What We Have to Do, a ringing interval bass ostinato and drum tom intro bring in the alto sax melody that has 13 measure and 9 measure sections. That intro then melody section pattern continues with some variation in phrase length for more rounds with improvisations from Tsakas staying close to the melodic idea. And the recording ends up with track 8, Why Don't We Dance? And you could slow dance to this tune with a loping bass line and a sexy alto sax melody. It's in an AABBA form of 40 measures with some unexpected harmonies on the way. Well, the whole melody takes more than 2 minutes at this tempo. Karotsis gets a bass solo on this one as well, and then Tsakas is in after that with some improvisations into the last section of the melody to wrap it up. It's a unique cordless sax trio album. Tsakas' great tone on both alto and soprano sax is front and center, as well as his technique. The structures of the tunes are unorthodox and will give you a challenge to figure out with a lot of variety. The uncrowded sense of space leaves a lot of chances for communication and synergy in the trio to happen. There's often a conversational interchange between Karotz's bass and Tsakas' sax lines, and the many rubato sections give Tsakas time to focus on tom tones and textures to fill out the landscape. The style and groove sometimes change suddenly, as we heard in the sample clips, and the recording strikes a nice balance between structure and freedom.
Yeah, I remember some of the Greek jazz albums that we've heard in the past, and I really wasn't expecting this, so I was really taken by surprise by this album. It's a really creative album with highly amorphous compositions, for the most part, and sensitive tone from Dimitris Tsakas. You especially hear that tone on tracks 1, Lost in Tradition, and 5, Conversation Helps. There's a shyness to the tone that's unusual in jazz. He varies it elsewhere. It sounds like an album that relies more heavily on timbre and mood than on rhythm, which is also highly unusual for jazz. Tsakas does a lot of playing on the album. He's almost constantly being heard, and there are moments where the bass and drums step out for a solo, but this is really Tsakas' album. He'll often converse in thematic fashion with Kimon Karoutzos on double bass, most notably on track 5, Conversation Helps. It's a really unique album, I thought. So if you liked the sample, I think you'll have to hear it all the way through.
Yeah, it's kind of introspective and intimate, I'd say. Something different.
Intimate's a good word.
I wasn't expecting that either, having heard him as a guest on a more kind of post-bop swinging type sax. But yeah, this was interesting too.
Yeah, he's bearing all here.
Yeah. And one more, saxophonist Brian Clancy on his own self-release, Something Old, Something New. This came out December 13th. Brian Clancy's from Southlake, Texas. He's a saxophone and woodwind player now based in Los Angeles. He graduated from the University of North Texas with a bachelor's degree in jazz studies. He's performed with Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band, Kurt Elling, Eric Reed, Gilbert Castellanos, and the Claire Fisher Big Band, and he enjoys pit work for musical theater, playing everything from piccolo to alto, flute, clarinet, and all of the saxophones. He also performs at Disneyland in the Disneyland Band, the Main Street Straw Hatters, and the Jambalaya Jazz Band. This is his second recording as a leader after his debut in 2012 that was called Introducing Brian Clancy. And we've heard him once before, back in episode 131, Maximum Music from September 2023, as part of Chris Berg and the Metroplexity Big Band with their recording Perspective. On this recording, Brian Clancy on tenor sax and some vocals on one track. We'll talk about that later. Josh Nelson on piano, Max Krauss on bass, Kevin Vandenelzen on drums, and a guest on one track, alto saxophone by Jason Fabus. Nick Chaffee was the recording engineer and did the mixing and mastering. This was recorded on July 7th, 2023 at the Woodshed Studios in Long Beach, California. The notes say the album was recorded in one room in one day, and there are accompanying videos from the session available to view on YouTube. Check those out, and it'll bring you into the music a little bit more to see what was going on there. The recording is going to start out with a Brian Clancy original Sunday Strut. After a 4-measure intro, Clancy's in on the nostalgic melody with some nice twists in the chord changes. I like his lazy phrasing and vibrato. The structure is an AABA form, but after the 8-measure A phrase, there are 2 measures like the intro that keep it there before it moves on. Let's hear this one get started. we can't make it into the B section in a minute's sample, but the field changes up with cute quarter note hits on the beat, and the final A section ending has a great break into Clancy's sax solo, so let's check that out. Nice and relaxed, just like Sunday afternoon. He works it to a bluesy finish. Nelson gets an animated piano solo with a good dose of blues feeling, and Krauss has a fine melodic bass solo on this one too. Clancy is back from the B section to the end of the melody to finish it up. Track 2, also a Brian Clancy original, Something Old, Something New, a happy swinging number for the title track. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro. The 38-measure melody really builds right to the end, including a 2-measure drum break into the sax solo. Let's check it out. Really swinging along. On this one, let's hear some of Nelson's piano solo. Really playful ideas. Krauss has a big and bold bass solo on this one as well, and once more through the melody with a neat little fun ending finishes it up. Track 3, another Clancy original, Bossa for Samba. This is also a really happy sounding tune. Drum brushes skitter into the rhythmic piano and bass intro, and then there's a little break for the sax melody pickup line. Listen to the cool bass and piano answering lines after the sax phrases. Nelson's off on a piano solo from there. Let's come back in to hear Clancy get started on his solo on this one. After his solo, they vamp around for Van den Helsing to get some drum time until a break for a final run through the melody. Track 4, another Clancy original, Last Night I Dreamed That You Changed Your Mind. A ballad, but with a nice sense of motion, started out by Nelson's piano intro. It has a charming 20-measure melody. Cross is up first for a bass solo on this one, so let's jump right back in and hear some of his playing. Nice work playing up high there. Clancy's solo is lyrical and smooth with nice connection of ideas, and Nelson has some classy tinkling high register ideas working into a bluesy finish. Clancy's back for once more through the melody with a nice finish over some bowed bass from Krauss. Track 5, also a Clancy original, Signal Hill. Jason Favis joins in on alto sax for this one, and the 36-measure melody has nice interplay between the two saxes. Fabus is just getting started on his solo here, so let's come back in and hear a little bit more. Tart tone and melodic ideas. Clancy follows, working to a nice climax, and Nelson mixes things up with fun ideas on his piano solo, and then the saxes trade eights with Van den Elzen before a final time through the melody. Track 6, our one standard on this album, Jimmy McHugh's I Can't Believe That You're in Love With Me, tune that goes back to 1927. A nice rubato sax and piano opening for this famous melody before things get really swinging. After the melody, Clancy continues on with a spirited solo. Let's hear one more from Nelson on this tune. That's a double espresso solo there with a few playful monkish touches. Krauss keeps the playful spirit in his bass solo with Van den Elzen doing nice brushwork underneath, and he gets to trade drums with snippets of the melody from the band for a fun round before they're all back together for a final time through. Track 7, the vocal version of Last Night I Dreamed That You Changed Your Mind, and Clancy's going to sing this one. Let's have a listen.
Last night I dreamed that you changed your mind and wanted to be with me. You looked at me with your hands in mine and told me our love could be. Then I awoke just a dream and a memory. I know in my heart that it's pointless to start to believe it could be like before. But tonight, as I close my eyes to dream, I'll hope you change your mind once more.
All right, I guess I could imagine Chet Baker singing this tune. It's heartfelt. Nelson solos first on this version, and then Clancy on sax, and finally Krause on bass before Clancy's back for a final vocal verse. And the recording finishes up with an alternate take of Signal Hill. Same tempo and feel here. It sounds a bit quieter, so maybe the mix or mastering is a bit different on this track. You can check out how the solos are different from the other versions. On this one, I'll just jump in for where the saxes are trading eighths with Van den Elzen. Good fun stuff, lots of good energy. So it's meat and potatoes, great swinging jazz here. Clancy's original compositions sound familiar right away, harking back to earlier jazz eras, but they have little twists in the structure and harmony that update the recipe, whether it's for swing, Latin, or a ballad. His sax tone is full, and his solos are swinging and melodic. He has a nice vibrato when the setting calls for it too. The rhythm section is energetic and tight, with standout playful solos from Nelson. Krause's bass solos have a lot of variety of expression too, and he locks in with Van den Elzen for tight grooves and chugging swing sections. Jason Favis sounds great on alto as a guest on one tune, with exciting sax interplay. Overall, you can tell that everyone is having fun, and the energy comes through the recording. If this doesn't put you in a good mood, see your doctor for a stronger prescription. Remember, you can check out some of the videos of the session on YouTube.
What you really need is a stronger prescription of jazz, really, okay? Because this is really as strong as it comes. It's a satisfying album of traditional jazz. It swings, it's bluesy, it's got good positive vibes, and it's also recorded up close and dry, which kind of makes it sound like an album from the golden age of jazz albums.
Yeah, all in one room.
Yeah, in the 50s and 60s, except that it's not, they don't have those things where the entire piano is squeezed into one channel.
Yeah.
Anyway, everyone on the album makes an impact, so I think this is more of an ensemble cast than, Brian Clancy's solo project, but it's his album, so he's got a good bluesy feel on the opening track, Sunday Strut, and swings for the rest. And his vocal on track 7 is, what's the word we'd like to use for this? Vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's vulnerable singing. I liked his playing a lot more, though. He's really great. Josh Nelson is sometimes electric on piano, always swinging and getting the required mood, and I liked his harmonic palette, too. Yeah. He's got those big, spacious chords that allow all the harmonics of the piano to sound. Max Krause on bass certainly makes sure his solos are noticed with his tactile, percussive plucking on the strings in his highly melodic solos. He had a good sense of melody, too, in his solos, too. I was pretty impressed by that. He's practically dancing in his solo, and I Can't Believe That You're in Love With Me. And Kevin van der Eltzen on drums has a solid swing feel. He has a lot of ideas for approaches when he steps out to solo. I preferred his harder hitting solos, such as Signal Hill on track 5. That's my rock and roll background. I just kind of like hard hitting drummers. It's, comes from my childhood. Anyway, this is a good traditional way to end our year of new records. I was pretty happy to hear this.
Yeah, a lot of fun. A lot of variety.
Yeah.
3 international sax releases there. 2 of them self-releases.
Yeah.
When artists go, put a record out on their own without record company backing, they're taking a chance on getting it heard out there. So I like to pick up those releases and give them a little playtime, hopefully get some new ears for those recordings. And that's what we do here at Adult Music. It's been a good year, Mike.
It has, yeah. I think it's been better than I thought it was, because I remember sort of saying, I'm not so crazy about the classical recordings I heard this year at the beginning of the year. But now I look back, and even at the beginning of the year, there were 1 or 2 that I'm probably going to have on my year-end list. So curious to see yours.
Well, we're well over 1,100 recordings now since we started. And how many did I say this year at the beginning of the podcast?
289 or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't remember the
289.
exact
That's
number.
it. So
Yeah.
our memories are not that great. Luckily, we have a huge spreadsheet of all of the recordings going back to the beginning. And so this week we'll go back and look through everything from this year, refresh our ears, and remember the ones. I think the ones I usually pick are the recordings that I went back to listen to again and again, because we have to listen to 6 a week, and that's a lot of listening. And to take notes and talk about these usually takes a couple hours for each recording. So we're always moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, not to mention we're still listening to other recordings that we're not talking about on our own. And one of the things about classical music this year is a lot of my favorite albums were double albums that I didn't put on the podcast simply because we weren't going to have time to, kind of hear them all during the week. But I heard a lot of them. So,
And anyone who takes a listen to our playlist that I put up on Deezer every week, I'm not going to put one up on before the episode. You're going to have to come to the episode to find out what our top picks are first.
Right. This week,
and then I'll put a little
and then we'll put them up later.
Collection of them up later if you want to go check out the full recordings. I want to keep it suspenseful for everyone, including us.
Yeah, we don't actually know what they are at the moment. We'll know sort of midweek, I guess, a few days before everybody else.
So that'll be our last episode of the year, right before we turn over the new year. So be sure to catch that. And then we'll come back on January 13th with our regular episode of new music for the new year. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Any final words for this episode, Mike?
I guess I'd say it's been a delightful year. It's been a crazy year, really, but not for us. It's been really rather nice for us, I thought. It was a crazy year outside, but here in the mountain lair, things are okay. We're sheltered from the lunacy.
It's always a little paradise of music. Yes. All right, so we'll be back with one more to wrap up the year next week. And until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.